powered by passion. It's National Auto Care's Fixed Ops 5 with your host, National Fixed Operations Training Manager, Corey Smith.
Welcome to Fixed Ops 5. I'm your host, Corey Smith, National Fixed Operations Training Manager with National Auto Care. Today, I'm being joined by Zach Spangler, CEO of Nimble. And in previous episodes, we've talked about employee retention, and I heard you speak about employee retention. So I wanted to get you on an episode and really talk about it. But before we jump into the episode, Zach, give me an elevator speech about yourself and the company.
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Zach Spangler, CEO and founder of Nimble Compensation. And really, Nimble Compensation is a software tool that allows dealerships to streamline the commission process and the entire compensation process, really. What we found working with a bunch of dealers is that most dealerships are using Excel for their commissions. And our software basically eliminates the hassle and the time associated with that. So this is a topic, employee retention, that we're really excited to talk about. We deal with it all the time, and just excited to be on your podcast. So thank you for having us.
Well, thank you. And tell everyone about you. What's the history of Zach? How'd you get to this point in your career?
It's a great question. Yeah. So kind of my background is actually in finance and accounting. And for a while, I was working in the startup world as an accountant and actually dealing with compensation in a whole different genre. I ended up making a transition to software as a result of that experience, and started working with dealerships in my hometown of Albuquerque, New Mexico. And this is actually a byproduct of that work that I was doing with them. Our first client actually came to us with the problem. They said, hey, we have this huge problem with compensation at our dealership. It takes us days. It's always wrong. You're a software guy. You have a background in finance and accounting. Do you think that you could help us with this? And so that's really the origin story of both Nimble Compensation and a little bit of background about myself.
That's awesome. I love that. So let's jump into the topic, employee retention. It's a huge issue in the dealership. It's a constant struggle. They need to add more technicians or add more salespeople, add more service advisors. What do you think is, let's just talk about the conversation of that struggle. Is it training that is the issue, that the employees don't last long? Is it the pay? Is it the core values of the company? Expound upon that.
It's a great question. I think there's a bunch of surveys that have been done on this. And I think the three top reasons from kind of what all these different surveys has found is that there's not a ton of opportunity for advancement and a lack of training. And really, I think that's more of a perception than a reality for these dealerships. And I think there's some things dealerships can do for that. I think the second reason is that there's this changing mindset as generation Z and these millennials are coming into the workforce around variable pay and then this kind of work-life balance. And the other thing that continually comes up in these surveys is that there's not a feeling of being valued by management. And I think that's a byproduct of employee turnover happening so often, right? That sometimes management has a tendency to lose connection with the constant rotation of people coming in and out. And so I think those are really the three reasons, and hopefully we can kind of dig into that a little more as part of this conversation.
Yeah. I mean, do you have any kind of analytics that kind of support that when it comes to employees just disengaging and leaving?
Yeah. So I think this is fascinating to me because I love numbers, obviously, with a background in finance. And so whenever I'm looking at this, I always like to take kind of a benchmark. And I know a lot of the dealerships do this in their top 20 groups and different things like that. But when you look at the national average for employee retention, there's kind of an annual turnover rate of 20%. And that's kind of, if you take across the US, all companies, this is the benchmark. And
Right.
So most companies can expect that kind of 20% kind of annual turnover. When you start looking at dealerships, though, this is based on a study by Cox. that turnover rate climbs to 46%, which it means every 2 years, basically, the entire dealership is new, right? And so a few of the places you see this the most are with sales consultants. In that survey, they found that 80%, there's a 80% turnover rate for sales consultants.
Wow.
Which is just insane, right? Yeah. So really it's, how do dealerships deal with this? Those sales guys are driving the revenue or so much of the revenue for the business. And I mean, that's massive, that kind of turnover. And the other one was a service advisors, which I know kind of as a fixed operations guy, you're familiar with, and that turnover rate was 49%. So again, these two areas where you're really driving revenue for your dealership, we're having problems keeping employees. Wow,
those are some staggering numbers. I really appreciate you bringing that to the table. In your mind, if we dig down any deeper, is it because the person that's leaving doesn't appreciate the company? Is it a pay plan issue? Is it really, I wasn't properly trained on my job? You can learn the basic trainings, right? That the dealership's going to say, this is, our software that we use. This is where the lot is. This is where new cars are. This is where used car keys are, and stuff like that. What do you think is the driving factor of these employees leaving at such a high rate?
Yeah. I mean, I think we can't really pinpoint it to one thing, right? And I think in my mind, I think there has to be a holistic approach to dealing with this problem. And kind of like you're saying, I think the first point that maybe we can kind of kick around and talk about a little bit is just this idea of there's no opportunity for advancement, or there's a lack of training. I think that's a good place for us to kind of start. And I think we can touch on two other things, but I think the first place is that this perception of there's a lack of advancement. I think, like, let's take the sales role, for example.
Yeah.
What a lot of dealerships do that we see is that they have one standard pay plan. It's typically a commission pay plan. Mm-hmm. And you know what? You're going to bring in the guy who has no experience selling anything, or the gal. You're going to throw them on that pay plan, and then immediately you expect them to produce or leave, right? And that's kind of been the mentality for a long time. And so what we're seeing from some of our dealership clients who have really done a good job of this is they've actually sat down and laid out a strategy for how they're going to onboard, right? And so what they're doing is now they're bringing salespeople in at a fixed rate, right? And so, hey, we're going to pay you an hourly rate, and that's going to cover the first 90 days, maybe the first 180 days, whatever the time period is. We're going to give you a fixed rate. So, for 90 days, you're going to get this. And as part of that, we're going to do training. We're going to do all this other stuff. And then what we see on top of that is they're also building out a few different pay plans. And so what that does is that it creates this idea of the ability to advance, right? Because you're going to move from, okay, let's say your hourly rate, which we'll call tier 1, to these advancement opportunities from tier 2 to tier 3 to tier 4. And so you're now building out this whole plan that when someone joins, they really feel like, okay, there is opportunity for advancement. There is ways that I can make more money. And what we're seeing and finding is that our dealership clients who are doing these types of things end up having much lower retention rates, much higher retention rates and much lower turnover rates.
Wow.
So that's like one way that I think that can be done. And I don't know, what's your experience with service advisors and things?
I think there's a lot of anxiety that the service advisor who is new to this, let's say they worked in, enterprise or waited tables or something like that, is they almost get thrown to the wolves saying, here's your desk, there's your computer, here's your phone, there's your route sheet, those are your technicians. Good luck, you got this. And that builds a lot of anxiety because they don't want to make a mistake. And then that also creates bad habits because they might be learning from an employee that's been there longer that wasn't properly trained either. Mm-hmm. Right. And in my mind, what I've seen is that they really truly don't know their pay plan. And then to your point exactly is, I love the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, because I could come in being, let's say, salesperson, to go back to that for a moment, is I could be salesperson 1, right? Is this tier 1 program. And then I graduate after a certain amount of time to tier 2, salesperson 2, right? And then go on and on. That makes me driven. When you say advancement, I was thinking, well, where does a salesperson go? He goes from being a salesperson to maybe a used car manager, maybe a general sales manager. But you broke it down even further than that I didn't even think of. I think that's genius. And if you're not writing this down right now, pull over in your car, stop what you're doing, and write that down, because you need to implement that in your dealership right now, even with advisors.
And I think you hit on a really good point, right? And it's this strategic thinking that we're encouraging dealerships to do, is where, hey, it's about creating some type of steps. It doesn't have to be this promotion, like you're saying, to used car manager.
Yeah.
It's about building these plans within a division, right? Within that group, and that's really a way to help build that idea of advancement.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost here's our core values of our company. Here's the process to do your job. And guess what? We're going to give you a strategy to go along with that. You can have the greatest process and, greatest core values in the history of the business. But if you don't have a strategy to go with it, what's your outcome? What's your why? That employee's lost. That's a great point. So what do we do for the employees? How do we keep them engaged? Once we've got this done, let's say the dealership implements this core values, process, strategy, tier program. Now, how do you really keep them engaged, make them feel valued? Because you were talking about it earlier, that the different generation, you need to speak differently to them. They have different wants and needs. They're not driven by money like you and I are, right? They're driven by experiences or days off, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. You hit that exactly right. And I think, so I think there's two pieces to kind of what you're saying there. And I think the first piece is, let's talk about how do we make them feel valued, right? And so I think starting there is that, exactly like you're saying, we have to understand, and this is just true of leadership in general, we have to understand how our employees feel valued. Traditionally, it's been, hey, if you pay me enough, I feel valued. But with these, right? Like if I can make enough money, it doesn't matter. Anything, you treat me like crap, whatever. But now there's a new generation. I think that's really something that leaders have to lean into now. Is look, there's a lot of different ways that people feel valued, right? And so like, it might sound, I don't know, like ooey gooey or whatever, but right? This idea of like, hey, affirmation is important, right? I was just reading an article about Gen Z. Validation on the job is a huge part of them feeling valued by the team, right? So just swinging by and saying, hey, great job closing that deal, things like that maybe traditionally haven't been done in the industry, but really building kind of this approach where, there's words of affirmation. There's obviously you got to make money, right? But face-to-face meetings, lunches, anything that you can really create this environment of, hey, we're a team and we're working together, I think is really important in terms of helping people feel valued and giving them a voice, right? Like the other thing that we see with that is the importance of communication. And I think that's not just one-way communication, it's two-way communication, right? So we see dealerships implementing some like surveys quarterly, right? Where at least they're letting people feel like, hey, you have a voice in terms of telling us what you don't like, how we can change, how we can improve, and things like that. And so I think that's kind of how we have to begin approaching our employees with a little different mindset than we have historically.
I really like that. So here's one of the last questions, because we're running low on time, that I want to ask you is, there is a shortage of salespeople, technicians, advisors. What are some tips that you can give the dealership on how they can get that next person into their organization, whether it's, looking in different places for that person? Is it certain trigger words that you're writing in your ad campaign? What in your mind is some some neat ideas that the dealership can use?
I mean, I think there's a lot of different approaches we can take here. I think the things that we're touching on are really part of this process, right? And really what we're talking about starts at the interview process. We're finding that more and more people are getting pulled, there's more and more offers on the table for people with this labor shortage and different things like that. And so I think really as part of the interview process and different things like that, really this culture that we're talking about needs to be established early, and it really will help you stand out. Some of the other things that we're seeing dealerships do to keep employees so they don't leave are some, like, I think in the service department, this is a really cool idea. And it's the idea of this longevity bonus, right? Oh. And so this idea that the longer you stay with the company, this bonus grows, so you make more money. But also what they're doing is they're holding that till the end of the year, right? And so they're doing this as a bonus payment at the end of the year. And so one of the things that we're seeing is that doing something like that actually is actually keeping employees at the dealership longer, because they have, a few $1,000s potentially bonus waiting for them, or more waiting for them at the end of the year. Right. Wow. And so that's something, again, that's kind of that creative problem solving in regards to pay that we're seeing dealerships do.
I really like that. So this is my favorite part of any episode that we do. What are the 3 takeaways from this episode in your mind that a service advisor, an agent, someone in the leadership of the dealership can take away from this episode?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is, I think really you need to build a strategic plan around hiring, training, and advancement. The second one is creating comp plans that allow employees to build and grow into a role. And then the third one is really utilizing all kinds of different ways in terms of encouragement, pay, to help employees feel valued.
Those are strong. I love that, Zach. Thank you so much. If you want to deliver a legendary customer experience that keeps the customer coming back to you and encouraging them to invite their friends, their family into your establishment, you've caught the gold standard customer service vision. Do you want a more cohesive team that delivers a higher level of customer service that will result in more revenue for your dealership? We provide the tools, knowledge, training to unlock that potential of your dealership. For more information on this topic and others, or to submit a question or to be a guest on the show, feel free to send me an email, csmith@nationalautocare.com. Zach, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for being a part of this episode. And I'll end like I do with every episode, with every guest. Will you please come back?
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for watching and listening to National Auto Care's Fixed Ops 5 with Corey Smith, powered by Passion. Be sure to watch and listen to the next episode on the 5th and 20th of every month.